go over the reform work and hopefully give you some food for thought. And I would encourage you all that if you do want to make submissions, you can send your points to CHF, who will be putting submissions in, or you can, from your own organisations, put your own submissions in. If you have a burning issue, it's better to put it in a submission and get it in there, because TGA can really only respond if they know what your issues are. They're not going to be able to pull them down out of the ether. So on that, I'm going to hand over to Tracy and Elizabeth to take you through, and I'm sure they'll do a better job than I've just done, to take you through this, and hopefully at the end you'll understand the reason for the consultation and the key points, and I'm hoping that there'll be lots of questions. So,
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you, Jo.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're really pleased to be here, Elizabeth and I think this demonstrates, and when I spoke to Jo a few weeks ago, this demonstrates the TGA's view that it's really important that we understand the impacts of any change that we might propose that might be implemented, particularly on patients and consumers, and that we give consumers an opportunity to have their say on certain changes that will impact them, either impact the access to medical devices or impact the way that medical devices are supplied here in Australia. As Jo said, we welcome submissions either individually or through CHF, and 2019 will be quite a busy year for the TGA. Whilst we've released 5 consultation papers, there will be some more coming on various topics. So keep an eye open, and we're happy to join in another webinar as time goes on for those topics that are of relevance and importance to consumers, more so some than others. So we'll just click through the PowerPoint presentation. I propose to give an overview of each of the consultation papers and try and ground the papers into some examples and demonstrate through some examples so you understand the areas that we're targeting with these 5 different areas of reform. So the 5 papers are one relating to changes for disinfectants, cybersecurity, unique device identification, reclassification of a range of medical devices that are used for diagnosing and then changing patient therapy, and then some changes of our framework to capture some items that aren't already captured, or there's ambiguity as to whether or not they fall of being regulated by the TGA and in detail. So please go ahead after this webinar and have a look if you haven't done so already. So the first one I'll provide an overview is in relation to disinfectants. Before I joined the TGA, I didn't realise that the TGA regulated disinfectants, along with some other things that surprised me. But there you go. Now, disinfectants, there is a number and a range of different disinfectants. They're different purposes as well. So you've got disinfectants for the preparation of skin when you're in surgery. You have, the pink or the yellow, or different disinfectants that are used for skin preparation procedure. But these disinfectants that we're talking about are the ones that are used for hard surfaces. So ones that are used on floors and bench tops. Some of these you will find in Woolworths. So we're really just focusing on those types of disinfectants for this particular consultation paper. Disinfectants are regulated by the TGA through what we call a Therapeutic Goods Order. And we have a number of those orders in place that relate to specific types of devices or goods. There's also one, I think, on some of the tampons and menstrual cups. So where there are specific devices that need particular attention, there are orders in place that cover those types of devices. So this change and this order sets out the requirements for manufacturers who supply disinfectants, and those requirements relate to the performance of the disinfectant, the packaging and the labelling. The order that we currently have in place expires on the 1st of April, and so we want to make a new order. In doing a new order, we just don't want to roll over the existing order. We want to make some changes, and we want to improve the way that these disinfectants are supplied and managed and, I guess, handled in the various environments where they're used. We know, and it's been reported to the TGA, that these disinfectants are being used in all sorts of ways, including some examples of hard surface disinfectants being used on skin preparation. So we want to try and stop that from happening, and so this new order will require better packaging and labelling to make sure that that type of practice is stopped. For consumers, I guess there's no substantial change to the way these products are regulated. The main changes are around what manufacturers need to do. They're mainly used in hospitals, healthcare facilities, and as a home, you can buy some of these things at Woolworths. But it's really important that if you have a view about the proposed changes or any concerns about disinfectants, please feel free to put that into your submission, or I guess provide some advice back to CHS. We can include that in our submission, their submission. So this one, I guess the key messages are, whilst the order has a strong focus on the technical requirements, consumer feedback is always welcome, particularly around the clarity of packaging and labelling requirements. And for this consultation, it closes next week on the 12th of February. Let's move to the next one. So the next one is quite a buzz at the moment throughout the world, and that's around cybersecurity. The fast increase of products with software or digital components has resulted in an increased heightened awareness of cybersecurity concerns for consumers, for government and industry, and so medical devices is no stranger to that as well. The TGA has done some preliminary work in this area, and we did partner with the CSIRO to develop what we call some enhanced guidance to help not only consumers but also manufacturers and developers of products that have connections to the internet, to make it clearer about what the things they need to be aware of when they're developing and selling and using these types of products. And we're hoping that an increase of understanding by the broader public, but also the users of these devices, through our guidance, will help with identifying and reducing the threats of cybersecurity breaches. So, and consumers have an important role to play here, and we really want to emphasise the fact that if you do have a device that talks to the internet, you have a personal responsibility to make sure that your passwords are strong and that you update your internet settings, making sure that all the software versions are up to date. We can, as the TGA, we can require manufacturers to always have the most up-to-date software available to download, but it does require the users of those technologies and devices to actively seek out and download and make sure they have the most up-to-date version of that software. Our regulations and our remit only goes so far, so there is a personal responsibility on the users of those devices to be able to be aware of the changes and to download. Connected devices that are most commonly used by consumers. There are a lot of apps out there. There's also a lot of internet-linked medical devices or devices with a software component. There's also devices that appear in all of our hospitals around the country and around the world that use the internet. So we need to make sure that any device manufacturer and any user of those devices is aware of the potential threat that could occur by very smart people who want to do damage and create harm for people. The guidance itself has a consumer fact sheet. So when you go onto the website and have a look at our consultation paper, there's a dedicated consumer feedback fact sheet, which is vital to get your input and feedback on, because we will use that fact sheet and it can be used right across the healthcare system to create awareness and to help consumers just think about the types of, I guess, actions they need to take in their personal responsibility if they have a device that uses the internet. Our guidance will also include the level of information that manufacturers need to provide, and I guess from our perspective, if there's any areas of clarity that need to be made more clear, or different areas that you have concerns with our guidance, we're happy to hear that feedback. Is there anything else on that one, Elizabeth, that you wanted to add?
No, Tracy, I think it's really key to highlight the consumer responsibility on this one, and we really would welcome some feedback on our fact sheet for consumers.
So this one closes on the 14th of February, again next week. So please, if the minimum you do is focus on that fact sheet for consumers, that would be absolutely perfect and great. The next consultation paper is titled A Unique Device Identification System. This paper and this consultation is first in what will be an ongoing dialogue that we will have right across the healthcare supply chain. While some devices already have some sorts of tracking systems in place, it's really what we're looking for is link internationally to have a common and of tracking and tracing the same device no matter where it's supplied in the system, either here in Australia or overseas, so that devices can be uniquely identified. So what is a UDI system? I guess the system comprises of a number of things. One, you have to have some standards in place that identify, well, what's the number going to look like and where should it be? And then the requirement to place that identifier on a device is labelling and packaging, so that it can be recorded, it can be stored, it can be tracked back through as to where that device was manufactured, where it actually was supplied, what hospital it went to, and then ultimately the unique device identifier can also be used for a whole range of other things, including, for example, if you wish to have that identification number stored in your My Health record or other hospital patients' records as well. So it's a 2 to 3 year process of sorting out the details of the unique device identification system. We're only at the starting point, and what this consultation paper is seeking to do is get feedback on whether or not it's a good idea for Australia to adopt such a system, and also whether or not it should apply to all devices. And so if you have a view on those things, we're very happy to hear that. The other component of the UDI, the Unique Device Identification System, is we're asking through the consultation process whether the TGA should be the holder of this database, or whether or not another entity should manage the proposed database. And feedback on that proposal would be welcomed as well. Any impact for consumers. I know that through the most recent inquiries, including for mesh-related issues, that many consumers, many women found it difficult to even find out whether or not they had a medical device implanted, let alone the number or type of the device that was implanted. So UDI, I guess, is a very useful mechanism to track and trace devices, no matter where they are around the world, and certainly that we all call the same device and recognise the same device consistently throughout the whole supply chain. This consultation closes on the 18th of February, but as I said, there will be more papers come out as we work through the detail of scoping the feasibility and the implementation arrangements with UDI. Let's move on to the next one. The next consultation paper relates to active medical devices. And what we mean by active medical device, I've got some examples to go through with you. But what we're proposing is to reclassify some of these devices from medium risk to higher risk classification. What it means is that there will be a higher level of scrutiny placed on those devices, and manufacturers of those devices will have to provide more clinical evidence to support the performance, the safety, and the efficacy and quality of those devices. By moving those devices from a medium risk to a higher risk, we'll ensure that the TGA also collects more data and has an ongoing role in the performance monitoring of those devices to a higher level and to a higher extent. Now, active medical devices, we're going to be talking a little bit about those, but really it's a type of device that plays a role in diagnosing a person's vital signs and then changes the patient's therapy. So, for example, let's talk about an automatic external defibrillator or an AED. Now, these devices are found in places like airports, in public buildings, in schools, and I guess it monitors and it's got built-in sensors that picks up readings from the patient and diagnoses the patient to determine whether a shock is required because someone is in cardiac failure or arrest, I guess, fibrillation. So for these devices, we're wanting to make them higher risk devices and put more scrutiny on them, because giving a shock to a person who doesn't need it is obviously dangerous, and not shocking someone who does need it may have significant harmful effects, including potential death for a patient. So making sure that devices work properly and we have a greater level of evidence to support their performance is what this consultation is all about. Another example is a closed-loop SIP system, where there's a complete system which does the diagnosis and treatment in one device, diagnosing the patient's symptoms. An artificial pancreas, for example, monitors hormones and levels of insulin in the blood, and then when it detects that you need some more, it triggers the injection pump to release insulin. So they're the types of devices we're talking about as active medical devices that have a role to play in changing a patient's therapy in the one system. More stringent assessment of the manufacturer will occur, so inspections of the manufacturing site and mandatory audits will also be required, as improved traceability of those devices, because they will be listed in our register of all devices, individual devices that can be tracked and traced a lot easier. So that's what we're proposing. Why would this be important to consumers? I think for peace of mind and confidence that the level of scrutiny and assessment for these types of devices is being heightened. So making sure that the confidence levels and the concerns that we've heard from consumers have been listened to, and we're responding to reclassify these types of devices. So feedback on whether other devices from this type of category should be captured is something we're looking for from this consultation. The consultation paper sets out some examples, but certainly we're looking for other devices that are similar in nature to these, should be captured by these changes, would be welcomed as part of the feedback. We've got some examples on the screen there, but certainly have a look at our consultation paper. For those who don't know, because I had to ask the question myself, the CPAP device is a continuous positive airway pressure device used for sleep apnea, so for people who have sleep apnea, and the hypothermia system regulates the body temperature. So those are the types of things we're wanting to reclassify as a high-risk device from a medium-risk device. Consultation closes on this one, 18th of February.
So just to reinforce the real reason behind this, the devices are making the decision about adjusting the treatment. So in the case of the body temperature, if it detects that someone's cold, it'll turn the heater on. So that's the key to making these active devices more of a risk for performance. So that's the focus of this one.
Let's move to, I think, the final one of the overview. This consultation paper really tries to pick up a number of devices that aren't currently part of our regulatory framework, or where there are some devices that look like a medical device but maybe not present in their paperwork or their labelling as a medical device. So their intended use may not clearly say that it's for a medical application or treatment. And there are quite a few things out there that fall into this category. So I guess the best way to describe this is with really targeting devices that mostly have a cosmetic purpose, but have similar or same risks as medical devices, but aren't presenting themselves currently as a medical device. We feel that these types of devices pose the same risk and harm opportunity that the medical device equivalent does. So we're wanting to be very clear about putting in place the regulations to capture those things and make manufacturers and who use these devices aware that they have an obligation to support the safety, performance and quality of these devices and the instructions for use and all of the other components that go along with getting approval to use these devices in Australia. So it's about definitions, it's about the scope of the products that will come under the remit of the TGA. It clarifies the definition about what is a medical device and what is an accessory to these devices. And as I said, it's proposing to change the regulations so that we do have the TGA will have a role to play in approving these types of devices. Now, I've got a whole list of some of the examples here. So infrared, ultraviolet, high intensity electromagnetic radiation devices, cosmetic facial injections, laser hair tattoo removal equipment, dermal fillers, equipment used for liposuction, lasers for skin resurfacing or other skin treatments. So you'll see from this category that quite a number of the cosmetic related devices will fall within this remit if these changes are implemented. So from a consumer point of view, there has been a number of concerns over the last couple of years relating to cosmetic practices. We're interested to hear from consumers and others about whether our proposal is a good idea in terms of making sure there's a bit more rigour involved in getting these things approved and how they're supplied to the Australian market. The consultation paper also gives a number of other examples. One of the ones that isn't cosmetic related is brain stimulation devices where there's either electrical currents or electrical magnetic fields that are used to stimulate brain function and certain things. So normally there are some devices out there now that don't purport to have a therapeutic use, but we're trying to, I guess, strengthen that and tighten that so that they are regulated under the appropriate safeguards. I guess the key thing for this is we're tightening how, what and when these devices are used to capture things that aren't currently regulated. And these go to some other examples like coloured contact lenses. So whilst the TGA plays a role in assessing normal contact lenses, the clear ones, the coloured ones are currently outside our framework. So we want to bring them in because they pose exactly the same harm because you're doing something in your eye as the usual ones that you would buy from your optometrist to help with vision. Why is that important to consumers? consumers have reported a lot of issues, both with the devices and the use of those devices, but also the practitioners and where they're being supplied. So we really do want to make sure that there's appropriate management and control over the design of these devices, and that there's written evidence demonstrating that the product complies with safety and performance requirements, and also we have some recall procedures in place, and that our advertising laws can apply to these types of devices. We don't want types of devices advertising and labelling things in an unsafe way and spruiking things that aren't actually true or accurate. So consumer feedback is really important for this one, particularly around the benefits or disadvantages of what we might be proposing. Maybe we're going too far, maybe we don't go far enough. So your feedback on those areas of change is greatly appreciated. This one closes again on the 18th of February. So the TGA recognises that whilst there's 5 consultation papers out, that's quite an onerous thing to respond to. For consumers, you'll have different views and different levels of interest in certain things depending on your experience with these types of devices. We have some others coming out which I guess I wanted to flag as well, which will be of interest to consumers. They are on personalised devices, including 3D printed devices. We did some earlier consultation last year and the year before on these group of devices. So this is the next and final consultation we'll be doing on this subject matter. And software as a medical device, including apps that people are using and patient diagnostic software. So this is a growing market, and it's an area the TGA has an existing regulatory role, but there's also quite a number of apps and software that's used that doesn't come within the remit of the TGA. So being able to clarify for patients and for users of these devices what the quality performance requirements are and making sure they're being assessed properly is the focus of that consultation paper. The next lot of consultation papers are due to be released in the coming week, and we will let the CHF know and others know when they're released, so that if you wish to have another webinar or if you'd like some further information, we can accommodate that as well. So where you'll find the consultation papers is on our website. How to submit a submission if you would like to put their own submission in, also on that web page, and you can keep up to date with further consultations through that same web page. So we're happy to answer any questions, and as Joe said, after the event, if there are any outstanding questions, we will respond to those, and Joe and the CHF can post them on their website. And Joe did also say that any contributions to the CHF submission to the TGA on any of the papers would be warmly welcomed as well. So I'll leave it there, and we'll see what questions we have that sent in to date. The first question was, can you clarify what sort of devices will get a UDI? So in our consultation paper, because this is the first consultation paper, we are putting forward that the majority of devices would have a unique device identifier. Our subsequent consultation papers will probably tease that out in a bit more detail, because what we've seen internally is that for some devices and groups of devices that make up a system, we need to provide some clarity about what our expectation is. In terms of examples, for example, a breast implant would get a UDI, a hip implant. So the high-risk devices would get absolutely a unique device identifier. Where it gets a bit murky is some of the lower-risk products, and I can give you an example: a tongue depressor, and maybe a rubber glove. So we just need to work through what the categorization is for unique device identifiers. That will come throughout 2019 as we work through what the appropriate level of classification should be with UDI. This first consultation is really focused on asking the question and getting feedback on whether it's a good idea for Australia, number one, and secondly, if it's a good idea for Australia, where should that database be held? And we're proposing that the TGA hold that database, which can sit side by side with our register of therapeutic goods, and potentially also link to other information like patient information leaflets, which describe in more detail that type of device. So watch this space, because further information and further detail about the type of devices will be coming through in 2019. The next question is: introducing a UDI or reclassifying devices impact on the availability of those devices? Let's deal with UDI first. So UDI is at the early stages of our thinking. It's fair to say that the unique device identification system is being considered globally right throughout the world. So in terms of the impost on manufacturers to put a UDI on devices, this is something that's happening internationally for good reason. So the impact in Australia, we would expect it would be an impact globally. And our alignment globally with adopting a UDI will mean that there would be limited impact on the availability of those devices, because they would still have to, I guess, conform to other countries' regulatory systems as well. And the transition period of placing a UDI on a product will be discussed with the industry, and we'll work with the industry to make sure there is no interruption to supply of devices going forward. The next part of the question was reclassification of devices and the impact on availability. What we found when we reclassified hip replacements and breast implants was that some manufacturers were not able to demonstrate a higher level of clinical evidence or the safety and quality of their devices. So I would see that through the reclassification process, there may be some impact on devices that can't demonstrate safety and quality and performance. And I guess the whole point of moving something from a medium risk to a high risk is we want to ensure that those safety and performance and quality criteria are met, because we've had reported issues with them. We will work with the sponsors of all of those devices, talking through what's required to reclassify, the time frame they'll need to gather their clinical evidence, and I guess what we're proposing in Australia for many of these things is what's happening around the world as well, as we improve and strengthen the safety of medical devices globally. The next question was around reclassification. Oops, it's gone. Can we get that one back? Of CPAP machines. So I think, Elizabeth, are you able to talk to that one a little bit, the continuous?
Yes, so the reclassification of the CPAP machines is only the machines that have a diagnostic function as well. So it's not just a CPAP machine. They're very common. A lot of people have them, but the ones that are monitoring the patient's breathing or response and adjusting the delivery of the therapy based on that. So it has an automatic therapy feature. And the reclassification will happen in a similar way that Tracey just described. The TGA will have a transition period to allow manufacturers to make a new application at the higher level, and we will review the evidence of quality, safety, and performance to ensure that it meets that higher benchmark. And those that can demonstrate that will be included in the register at the higher classification level, and the supply will continue.
The next question was around, will the changes include devices such as spinal cord stimulators? If so, will this make access to them more difficult for patients? So there's two components to this question. The first one, what will the changes include? And in our consultation paper, that's part of our consultation, we have asked the question, what should be included and captured as part of this proposed change? And usually when we go out to consultation, particularly to the industry, there's sometimes feedback that we get to say, well, these types of devices shouldn't be included in this change because of these reasons. So we're leaving that open as part of the consultation. The intention is to include those types of devices. The second part of the question is about access. So what we're trying to do in the TGA is
high degree. We already place a great deal of scrutiny on active implantable medical devices, so the changes are more applicable to non-implantable devices. So that higher level of scrutiny will be applied.
Yeah. Sorry, we just saw that the audio had dropped out. I think we're okay now. Okay. Sounds back. Good. Excellent. I can see thumbs up. Will reclassification mean that it will take significantly longer for devices to be approved and become available to consumers? Do you want to take that one?
So I think following on from the earlier
We're back on. We're back on. Can someone give us a thumb up? Can people see us now? Back on now, yay. Excellent.
Okay.
Okay, start again.
Okay, great. So for existing devices that are already being supplied in Australia, there's a transition period for them to be reclassified. This is to enable the industry to get the appropriate documentation in place, make that they do have that evidence of quality, safety, and performance. And for new product entering the market, there will also be that transition period to allow new companies to understand what those requirements are. Now, in terms of in-house capabilities, we are definitely ensuring that we have pathways available so that, you know, when the appropriate evidence is supplied to the TGA, we are able to approve them and get them into the register.
Some of those pathways that Elizabeth just spoke about is we have a new fast pathway for new and emerging technology that deliver significant patient benefits. But also last year we put on our website the availability of using evidence from comparable overseas regulators to form part of the dossier of information that you could provide to speed up the process in our assessment regime. Any more questions?
Long one.
It's a long one. Hospitals are already required to maintain a list of invasive devices, and for sterilising, many are now etched with a unique identifier to support traceability down to the instrument level. Will there be consultation to ensure there is no, can't see the bottom, hold on, no duplication of effort? Yes. So I've already engaged and will continue to engage with the different hospital industry groups. So public hospitals, private hospitals, day hospitals, through the industry groups, through the Safety and Quality Commission, through the state and territory government departments. I think it's really important that it is reduced. I think the identifiers that hospitals currently use are mainly around supply and the types of numbers that the supplier puts on their devices to ensure they know where their devices are. What we're talking about is a higher level of a consistently applied and consistent format of device identification that will be globally agreed through standards. So whilst each manufacturer may already have its own way of tracking and putting numbers on its devices, some using G10 or other type identifiers, this will incorporate and include and be an internationally recognised process. So there may have to be a view of what the hospital systems currently accept into their system to make sure that if we do adopt a UDI Australia, that the field that is used to put that information in can accommodate that number and that alphanumeric combination. But these are the things that we will consult on over the next year or two as we work through how something like this might be implemented. We need to get across that first hurdle of, is this a good idea for Australia? And if so, should the TGA start the process of exploring this in more detail? And then who are the people we need to talk with in more detail to actually make it happen and implement over the next 2 to 3 years? So it's a step-by-step approach, and will have impacts on anyone who deals with devices if they want to be able to track and record and trace devices through the system. It includes registries, it includes prostheses lists, records, all of those types of things as well.
So that's a good question, and I think we have a good answer for that. We do not have a lot of problem with cybersecurity at the present time. So there is a lot of proactive work in understanding whether or not a device is cyber secure, so that you might have seen things in the media about vulnerabilities being identified. But mostly that's been happening through, as I said, this proactive approach in trying to identify these issues before they become problems and before they become a way for patients to be harmed. So it's an area where all international regulators, but not only regulators, manufacturers as well, are focusing a lot of effort and attention. And some very sophisticated scenario-based testing that's happening. It's quite active, and I'm happy to say so far very successful. So I think it's not a major issue because we've had problems, but because we recognize the potential for problems.
I think our consultation, and we focused on this a little bit earlier, is we do want to help and support consumers with their own awareness of potential problems, which is why our guidance not only looks at clarifying what the arrangements are in place already for cybersecurity, but there's that added benefit of, and people who use these devices, how can we help you become aware and keep aware of responsibilities to be vigilant about passwords and those types of things that would support the device functioning the way it's intended to function. So it's a two-part process we're trying to achieve here, not only supporting the manufacturers because they're doing a good job, but also the users of these devices, whether it be personal use or whether it's in a hospital setting. So the question is, when will I be able to buy the new Apple smartwatch in Australia? Well, you can buy the new watch in Australia, it's just some of the functions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the ECG function is probably what you're asking about, is not yet available in Australia. When and if Apple decides to release it here, they will come through the appropriate and have it included in the ARTG, and then that will become available. So I don't know what their marketing strategy is, but it is a medical device, the ECG function, and it has been approved in other jurisdictions, so I'm sure it's likely that they're planning to come here as well.
We can't force them to make an application. So perhaps you could ask Apple to get a wriggle on. Is there another question? Yeah. Okay.
The difference in assessment between medium for high-risk devices, the device itself must have a certification called a design examination, and that certification is only valid for a certain period of time. It must be recertified every few years, and ensuring that the evidence is continually updated, that the manufacturer does environmental scanning to look for any new risks. Last question, okay. And, you know, of course, ensuring that the device complies with the essential principles. Now, for higher risk devices, the level of evidence with that compliance for safety and performance is more stringent. Now, for a moderate risk device, we still expect that the device is safe, performs as intended, intended, but we put in a higher focus on ensuring that that more of the data is reviewed prior to issuing that certification. However, for those moderate devices, if we have a question about any of the data, we will review it in the same level of detail. We do ensure that information is present, and if there's a question, then we will again do that deeper dive. But for the higher risk, we are going to look at it thoroughly without that extra.
It's true to say also that higher risk devices, we go and inspect manufacturing sites.
Yes, we do that for the moderate risk as well.
Okay.
So it's
but on a more regular basis.
It's on a more regular basis, and I think the key difference is that that certification that forces the manufacturer every couple of years to reapply, to re-examine all of that evidence. Whereas for the moderate risk, it's thoroughly assessed before the device is approved for market, and then more on a manufacturer quality signal basis after that.
So that was our final question. We've been told that we've used our time. I hope that was a useful overview of the consultation paper. And please feel free to send in some more questions if you have them, and we'll answer them over the next few days. And if you found this to be a useful thing to do, happy to support another one on a lot of consultation papers as needed. So thank you very much for those who participated, and thank you very much to CHF for organising, and we're happy to help in any way and clarify any of the components of what we're proposing, and welcome your comments and views on what we're proposing. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Hope it was helpful.